welcome. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Or, I might show up at your door. I'm just here to share some creepy stories, so sit back and enjoy. Disclaimer: the content presented in the video is purely for entertainment purposes only. The theories and stories discussed in this video are speculative and are not supported by any evidence or proof. Viewer discretion is advised. I've always been the type to ignore emergency alerts. They're usually tests or amber alerts from 3 counties away or warnings about flash floods that never materialize. So when my phone buzzed that Monday morning with that familiar harsh tone, I barely glanced at it before swiping away. It was 7:22. I was already running late for the Peterson meeting. Spilled coffee stained my white shirt, the one I'd specifically ironed last night for today's presentation. Just perfect. Damn it, I muttered, dabbing at the brown splotch with a damp paper towel. The stain spread wider. Even better, my apartment on the Upper East Side offered a decent view of the Queensboro Bridge and the East River. Usually, morning traffic crawled across it in a steady stream of metal and exhaust. Today, something seemed off. The bridge looked congested, but not in the usual way. Cars weren't moving at all. My phone buzzed again. Same alert. Emergency alert. Structural concerns on Manhattan bridges. Avoid all bridge crossings until further notice. Probably maintenance issues they'd neglected for years finally coming to a head. Classic New York infrastructure. Ignore it until it's an emergency. Thankfully, I didn't need to cross any bridges to get to work. The financial district was just a subway ride away. I grabbed my laptop bag, gave up on the coffee stain, and headed out the door. In the elevator, Mrs. Whitaker from the 12th floor clutched her small dog nervously. "Did you get that alert?" she asked, her voice slightly higher than usual. "Yeah, probably nothing. You know how they exaggerate these things." "I don't know." Carl said he saw something strange on the Brooklyn Bridge yesterday. Said it looked like the road was moving. I smiled politely. Carl also claims he saw Bigfoot in Central Park last summer. The elevator doors opened to the lobby, and I stepped out into what should have been the usual morning chaos. Instead, the doorman stood transfixed by the small television behind his desk, and several residents were gathered around it. Reports coming in of unusual structural movements on the Manhattan, Brooklyn, and Williamsburg bridges. Officials are asking residents to remain. My phone rang. Rachel from work. "Hey, are you seeing this?" she asked without preamble. "The bridge thing?" "Yeah. Just got the alert." "No. Hold on." There was shuffling, and it sounded like she was moving. "I'm by the window. The Brooklyn Bridge is..." "Tom, it's moving." "Moving how? Like swaying in the wind?" "No, like shifting. Parts of it are rotating. This isn't normal. They're evacuating our floor." I stepped outside onto East 79th Street. Something was wrong with the sound. New York is never quiet, not even at 3 a.m. But now there was an absence, fewer cars, fewer people. The background hum of the city muted like someone had turned down the volume. My phone buzzed again. Emergency alert. Confirmed incidents on Manhattan, Brooklyn, and Williamsburg bridges. Shelter in place. I hesitated on the sidewalk. Shelter in place? For a bridge issue? That seemed excessive. Still, Rachel had sounded genuinely disturbed. I decided to head to the office anyway. Better to be there with colleagues than alone in my apartment if something was actually happening. The subway was eerily empty for rush hour. Those few passengers who were riding sat silently, staring at their phones or out the windows, tension visible in their rigid postures. At Wall Street, I emerged to find the financial district in disarray, not panicking, but unsettled. Groups of suited professionals stood on corners, looking up at buildings where news played on lobby televisions. Our office tower was only half occupied when I arrived. Most of my team had gathered in the conference room where all 3 wall-mounted TVs displayed different news channels. Unprecedented situation unfolding across Manhattan's bridges, structural anomalies that engineers cannot yet explain, officials denying reports of sabotage but have not ruled out. Simon, our team lead, nodded grimly when I entered. Peterson meetings canceled. Half the clients couldn't make it in. What's actually happening? I asked, setting down my bag. Nobody knows for sure. Official statement says it's structural stress causing unusual movement patterns in the bridges. But look, he pointed to someone's laptop where Twitter was open. A video showed what looked like the pedestrian walkway of the Brooklyn Bridge undulating slightly, like a ribbon in water. That's got to be fake, I said immediately. CGI or something. Rachel shook her head. I saw it with my own eyes from the east windows. Something's wrong with them. As if on cue, everyone's phones blared simultaneously. Emergency alert. All Manhattan bridges closed indefinitely. Do not approach bridge structures. The office erupted in conversation. Theories bouncing from terrorism to engineering failure to the more absurd. I walked to the east-facing windows. From the 31st floor, we had a clear view of the Brooklyn Bridge and part of the Manhattan Bridge beyond it. Traffic had completely stopped. Police vehicles created blockades at entry points. And there, just as I was about to turn away, I saw it. One of the massive stone towers of the Brooklyn Bridge. Shifted, not collapsed, not tilted, but rotated, almost imperceptibly, perhaps only a degree or two. If I hadn't been staring directly at it, I would have missed it. The movement was subtle but impossible. Stone towers built in the 1800s don't rotate. I blinked hard. When I looked again, everything appeared normal. Did you see that? I asked no one in particular, but no one was near me. My phone rang, Mom calling from Boston. Tom, are you okay? We're seeing the news about the bridges. I'm fine. Mom, I'm at the office. They're probably overreacting to some maintenance issue. It doesn't look like a maintenance issue on the news. They're saying. Her voice cut out, replaced by static. Mom, I tried again. Mom, the call dropped. When I tried to call back, I got nothing but a fast, busy signal. I checked my signal, full bars but no data connection. Around the office, others were experiencing the same problem, holding phones up as if better reception was just a matter of height. By the window again, I stared hard at the Brooklyn Bridge. It looked entirely normal now, majestic and still against the East River backdrop. But something caught my eye, movement along the riverbank. Military vehicles. Not police or emergency services, but actual armored personnel carriers moving into position near the bridge approaches. In the distance, sirens wailed, not the usual city ambience of occasional emergency vehicles, but a sustained chorus growing steadily louder. They're setting up blockades all around Lower Manhattan, said a voice beside me. It was Dave from accounting, his face pale as he looked out the window. My brother's NYPD says they got orders from the top, nobody in or out near the bridges. Says they're not being told why. That seems excessive for a structural issue, I replied, trying to maintain my skepticism despite the unease growing in my stomach. Yeah, Dave said quietly, that's because it's not a structural issue. As if to emphasize his point, a helicopter flew past our building, unusually close to the windows. It hovered near the Brooklyn Bridge, and we watched as it seemed to examine the structure. Then, without warning, one of the massive suspension cables, The thick primary cables from which the roadway hangs moved, not swayed, moved, like a finger curling. Dave and I both stepped back from the window simultaneously. "Tell me you saw that," he whispered. Couldn't respond. Because the thing is, bridges don't move like that. Not ever. And that's when I realized that whatever was happening, it wasn't a maintenance issue at all. My phone buzzed again in my hand, but I already knew what it would say before I looked down to read the words. Emergency alert. Situation escalating. All Manhattan residents remain indoors and away from windows with view of bridge structures. The conference room descended into chaos as everyone tried to make sense of what was happening. 3 TVs mounted on the wall displayed different news channels, each telling a slightly different story. I stood transfixed, trying to reconcile what I'd just seen with what I knew to be possible. "They're saying it's structural fatigue," Simon announced, volume raised to be heard over the commotion. Years of neglected maintenance finally catching up. "Bullshiz," Dave muttered beside me. "Bridges don't move like that from metal fatigue." Channel 4 showed aerial footage of the Brooklyn Bridge. Zooming in on the Manhattan side tower, everything looked normal from that angle. A reporter stood on the edge of the evacuation zone, gesturing emphatically. "Unprecedented closure of all East River crossings. Officials cite structural integrity concerns." Those sources within the DOT suggest this may be related to seismic activity detected beneath the riverbed. Channel 7 told a different story. Incidents reported on multiple bridges. Eyewitness accounts describe unusual movements in support structures. City engineers are on site evaluating the situation. Mayor's office urges calm but recommends avoiding all bridge approaches, and New York 1 had yet another angle. Unconfirmed reports of possible sabotage. Homeland Security has been called in, though officials deny any credible terrorist threat at this time. The unusual nature of the structural failures has led some experts to speculate all channels were interrupted simultaneously by an emergency broadcast. Emergency alert. All Manhattan bridges closed indefinitely. Do not approach bridge structures. The same message that had just buzzed on our phones. A monotone voice read it aloud. Then the screen returned to regular programming. "This doesn't make sense," I said, more to myself than anyone else. "If it's just maintenance issues, why the military presence? Why the communication blackout?" Rachel pulled me aside, her voice low. "My cousin works for the Port Authority. Says they started noticing irregularities in the bridge's monitoring systems 2 days ago. Sensors showing movement where there shouldn't be any. They thought it was equipment malfunction. And now they don't know what to think." She says they've never seen anything like this. The office Wi-Fi was still working, though sluggish. I pulled up Twitter on my phone to see what people were saying. The tags #NYC Bridges and #Brooklyn Bridge were trending, filled with blurry videos and frightened speculation. One video in particular caught my attention, shot from Dumbo, showing the Manhattan Bridge in the background. The person filming was commenting on the unusual lack of traffic when suddenly one of the massive steel beams visibly twisted, just slightly, before settling back into place. The video cut off abruptly. Comments underneath ranged from obvious fake to, "I saw the same thing on the Williamsburg." I tried calling my sister in Queens. The call connected, but the quality was terrible. "Tom, is that you? The connection's awful." "Yeah, it's me. Are you seeing the news? It's all they're talking about. They've closed the bridges from this side too." "What's going on over there?" "I don't know. They're saying structural issues." But I lowered my voice. "I saw something weird. The Brooklyn Bridge moved. Not like swaying in the wind. Like it was moving itself." Static crackled. "Breaking up." "What did you say?" "The bridge moved. Like it was alive. More static. Can't hear. Queens is lockdown. The call dropped. When I tried to redial, I got an automated message. All circuits are busy. Please try your call again later. Simon called for everyone's attention. Management says we should all go home. They're shutting down the building for the day. A chorus of protests erupted. Go home? How? The bridges are closed. The subways are still running. He replied, for those who live in Manhattan, head home. For those who live in outer boroughs, they're working on solutions. Ferries might still be operational. My apartment was on the Upper East Side. I could make it home easily enough. But what about Rachel, who lived in Brooklyn Heights, or Dave in Astoria? As if reading my thoughts, Dave shook his head. I'm not going anywhere near the water right now. I'll crash with my brother in Midtown. People began gathering their things. The usual end-of-day banter replaced by tense silence. I found myself lingering by the windows, staring at the Brooklyn Bridge in the distance. It looked completely normal now. Static, immovable, a 140-year-old stone and steel structure that had withstood hurricanes, blizzards, and the relentless march of time. I must have imagined it moving. Mass hysteria was a real phenomenon. After all, someone says they see something, and suddenly everyone thinks they see it too. As if in response to my rationalization, a section of the pedestrian walkway on the bridge rippled, a small, wave-like motion that lasted less than a second. I blinked hard, convinced my eyes were playing tricks. Did you see that? A voice startled me. It was Helen from HR, standing a few feet away, also staring at the bridge. My mouth went dry. See what? The walkway. It moved, like a ripple. So I hadn't imagined it. Others had seen it too. They're saying it's just structural issues. I offered weakly. Helen didn't respond, just continued staring at the bridge with wide eyes. My phone buzzed again. Another alert. Emergency alert. Mandatory evacuation of all areas within 500 feet of bridge structures. Follow directions of emergency personnel. Outside, the wail of sirens grew louder. Helicopters, military, not traffic or news, circled the bridges. From our vantage point, we could see people being herded away from the areas near the bridge approaches. I decided it was time to head home. The subway was my best bet, assuming the lines were still running. In the elevator down, nobody spoke. The usual small talk of office workers heading home was replaced by tense silence. Everyone staring at their phones, refreshing news sites for updates. The lobby was chaos. Security guards were trying to maintain order as people streamed out of the building. Through the glass doors, I could see military police vehicles now lined up along the street. Outside, the air felt different, heavier somehow. The usual cacophony of Manhattan was muted, replaced by distant sirens and the thrum of helicopter rotors. Digital billboards in Times Square had been commandeered for emergency messages, all displaying the same alert about bridge closures. I joined the flow of people heading toward the Fulton Street station. The crowd moved with unusual urgency, but not quite panic. Not yet. Inside the station, the electronic signs indicated trains were running, but with delays. I pushed through the turnstile and made my way to the platform for the 4 train uptown. While waiting, I overheard snippets of conversation around me. Said the Williamsburg Bridge is completely closed off. Military's got it surrounded. Friend at the Coast Guard says they're not letting any boats near the bridges either. Heard it's not structural. It's something in the water eating away at the foundations. The train arrived, packed but not sardine tight. I found a spot to stand, gripping the pole as the train lurched forward. The usual subway indifference was gone. Passengers exchanged worried glances. and everyone seemed to be checking their phones constantly. At Union Square, the train stopped longer than usual. The conductor's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to a police investigation, this train will be bypassing Brooklyn Bridge City Hall Station. Again, we will not be stopping at Brooklyn Bridge City Hall." Murmurs rippled through the car. A woman near me whispered to her companion, "They're not even letting the trains go near the bridges now." I checked my phone again. No new alerts, but the service was getting worse. Websites loaded partially or not at all. Twitter wouldn't refresh. The train eventually continued, stopping at every station except the one nearest the Brooklyn Bridge. As we passed through without stopping, I pressed against the window, straining to see anything unusual. The station looked abandoned. Lights dimmed. Not a soul on the platform. By the time I reached 86th Street, my stop, it was late afternoon. The streets above ground were strangely quiet for a Monday. Electronic signs on bus stops had been repurposed to display the emergency alert. "All bridges closed. Stay clear of bridge approaches. Follow instructions from authorities." I walked the few blocks to my apartment, noticing more military vehicles than before. Soldiers stood at major intersections, directing traffic and keeping people moving. Inside my building, the lobby was abuzz with residents gathered around the doorman's television. I slipped past them to the elevator, suddenly exhausted. When I reached my apartment, I went straight to the window that faced the Queensboro Bridge in the distance. With the sun beginning to set, the bridge was silhouetted against the darkening sky. It looked solid, immovable, but as I watched, I saw it again, a subtle movement along one of the massive support beams, a slight rotation that was simply impossible for a structure of that size and material. I stepped back from the window, heart pounding. Whatever was happening, it wasn't over. It was just beginning. Sleep didn't come easily. I tossed and turned, my mind replaying the impossible movements I'd witnessed. Around 3 a.m., I finally drifted off, only to wake with a start at 6:17 to the harsh buzz of another emergency alert. Emergency alert. Mandatory curfew in effect. Stay away from all bridge structures and waterfront areas. I rubbed my eyes and stumbled to the window. The early morning light cast long shadows across the city. The Queensboro Bridge stood sentinel over the East River, looking deceptively normal in the distance. No traffic crossed its span, not a single car or pedestrian. Military vehicles blockaded both ends. My apartment felt suddenly claustrophobic. I switched on the television, hoping for clarification. Every channel showed news coverage of the bridges. Helicopter footage displayed the massive structures, still and silent. Reporters spoke in grave tones about the situation, though no one seemed to know exactly what the situation was. Now entering day 2 of what officials are calling an infrastructure anomaly event. All bridges connecting Manhattan to the outer boroughs remain closed. Ferries and water taxis have also been suspended. The governor has activated the National Guard to assist with maintaining order. My phone rang. It was Lauren, my ex, who lived in Williamsburg. We'd broken up 6 months ago but remained on good terms. "Hey," I answered, surprised to hear from her. "You okay?" "Not really." Her voice sounded strained. "Have you seen what's happening with the bridges? Just what's on the news. Are you safe for now? But Tom." She paused. "I saw something last night. Couldn't sleep. So I went up to the roof. I had a clear view of the Williamsburg Bridge. And it moved, not like swaying in the wind. One of the towers twisted, like it was turning to look at something." My stomach dropped. "I saw something similar with the Brooklyn Bridge yesterday. This isn't structural failure," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. The bridge straightened out after a few seconds. But then, and I swear I'm not making this up, I saw something in the water. Like the water itself was moving against the current, flowing upward along the pylons. I walked to my window again, staring at the Queensboro Bridge in the distance. Have you tried to leave Brooklyn? They've shut down everything. No bridges, no tunnels, no ferries. They're saying it's temporary. But she trailed off. But what? People are saying different things in Brooklyn than in Manhattan. Our local news is reporting aquatic seismic anomalies. They're telling us to stay away from the water completely. One of my neighbors tried to take his boat out this morning, just a small fishing boat, and the Coast Guard intercepted him immediately. I switched channels on my TV. A press conference was starting. The mayor stood at a podium flanked by officials in various uniforms. Assure all New Yorkers that we are taking every precaution. The bridge closures are temporary while we conduct thorough structural assessments. There is no cause for panic. I repeat, there is no cause for panic. We ask that all residents respect the curfew and avoid restricted areas. They're lying, Lauren said, and I realized she was watching the same press conference. If it's just structural assessments, why are they treating the water like it's radioactive? The call began breaking up, her voice distorting. Lauren, you're cutting out. Trying to contact Brooklyn different. The line went dead. When I tried to call back, I got an automated message. Due to emergency protocols, calls between boroughs are currently restricted. Between boroughs? They were restricting calls now. I opened my laptop and tried to check Twitter. The site loaded, but slowly. Hashtags about the bridges were no longer trending. In fact, they seemed to have disappeared entirely. Facebook was similarly scrubbed of recent posts about the bridges. A notification popped up on my screen. Internet access restricted by emergency protocol. I stared at it in disbelief. They were censoring the internet now. My phone buzzed again. Emergency alert. Misinformation alert. Trust only official channels. Spreading unauthorized information about bridge incidents is prohibited. A chill ran down my spine. This wasn't about bridges anymore. This was about control. I tried texting Rachel, who lived in Brooklyn Heights with a view of the Brooklyn Bridge. Are you seeing this? The information blackout. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared. Then, be careful what you text. They're monitoring everything. Paranoia gripped me. I went to the kitchen and made coffee, trying to calm my nerves. The familiar routine helped, but my hands still shook as I poured the water. Back at the window, coffee in hand, I studied the Queensboro Bridge again. The morning sun glinted off its steel superstructure. Nothing moved. Nothing changed. Then I noticed something odd about the water. The East River usually flowed with visible current, but now it seemed still, too still. Near the bridge pylons, the water appeared darker, as if shadows were gathering beneath the surface. I grabbed my camera with its zoom lens and focused on the water near the bridge. Through the viewfinder, I could see that the water wasn't just darker, it was moving differently around the pylons. While the rest of the river flowed normally, the water near the bridge seemed to circulate in small, tight patterns, like tiny whirlpools. As I watched, one of these whirlpools began to climb the pylon. Not splash against it, climb it, defying gravity, spiraling upward along the concrete structure. I nearly dropped the camera. Water doesn't move like that. I quickly took several photos, then stepped back from the window, heart pounding. I needed to show someone. I needed to know I wasn't losing my mind. The building's super, Mr. Gallo, had been here for 30 years. If anyone would know if this was somehow normal for the East River, it would be him. I rode the elevator down to the basement where his office was located. The door was ajar, and I could hear a radio inside, advising all residents to stay away from windows facing the East River. Repeat, stay away from windows facing the East River. This is for your safety and the integrity of the ongoing operation. I knocked. Mr. Gallo, the radio clicked off. After a moment, he appeared at the door, his usually friendly face tense. Yeah, sorry to bother you, but I was wondering if you've ever seen anything strange about how the water moves near the bridges. His expression changed subtly. Why do you ask? I hesitated, then showed him one of the photos I'd taken. I just noticed the water behaving oddly around the pylons. He stared at the photo for a long moment, then handed back my camera. I wouldn't worry about it, he said, his voice flat, and I wouldn't look too closely at the bridges if I were you. Some things are better left unseen. Before I could respond, he stepped back into his office and closed the door firmly. I stood there, stunned. That wasn't the reaction I'd expected. On my way back to the elevator, I passed the building's community board. It was covered with new notices, curfew information, restricted area maps, and a large poster with the heading Bridge Safety Protocols. I stepped closer to read it. The poster contained a list of instructions. Avoid all bridge structures and approaches. Do not photograph or record bridge structures. Avoid waterfront areas. Report unusual bridge or water behavior to authorities. Disregard unverified information about bridge incidents. Remain indoors during curfew hours, 8 p.m. to 6 a.m. Limit communication to essential messages only. The final instruction made my blood run cold. If you observe bridge movement, do not continue watching. Turn away immediately. Turn away? Why would they instruct people to turn away, unless seeing was somehow dangerous? Back in my apartment, I returned to the window, drawn there despite my growing unease. The bridge looked the same as before, still, solid, unmoving, but the water around the pylons was definitely behaving strangely, circling in those unnatural patterns. As I watched, the water spiraling up one of the pylons reached the roadbed of the bridge. Instead of falling back down, it spread across the underside of the structure, like a dark stain expanding across fabric. And then, almost imperceptibly, the entire bridge shifted, not just a cable or a beam, but the entire massive structure adjusted its position, rotating perhaps 2 degrees to the east. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Another alert. Emergency alert. Remain indoors. Do not observe bridge structures. Compliance is mandatory. I stepped back from the window, letting the curtain fall. Whatever was happening to the bridges, they didn't want us to see it, and that terrified me more than anything else. I woke to the sound of pipes groaning. The noise echoed through my apartment walls, a low, drawn-out protest of metal under pressure. I fumbled for my phone. 5:48 a.m. No new alerts. Surprisingly, in the bathroom, I turned the faucet. Nothing happened. I tried again. A shutter ran through the pipes, but no water emerged. After a moment, a few drops trickled out, rust-colored and thick. I quickly shut it off. 2 minutes later, my phone buzzed. Emergency alert. Water contamination possible. Restrict water usage. Remain indoors. Perfect timing. I fought down a hysterical laugh. There was something calculated about these alerts now, almost as if they were responses rather than warnings. The television offered little new information. The same recycled phrases. Ongoing situation. Structural assessment. Temporary measures. The reporters seemed different today, their expressions too composed, their words too scripted. One news anchor wore the same tie he'd had on yesterday. And the day before, I was certain of it. Outside my window, Manhattan looked deceptively normal. The morning sun glinted off glass towers, but the streets below were too empty, too ordered. Military vehicles had established checkpoints at major intersections. Soldiers directed the sparse traffic with mechanical precision. Water. I needed bottled water. Despite the alerts to stay indoors, I had to risk a trip to the corner store. I grabbed my jacket and keys, then hesitated, staring at my camera. After a moment's consideration, I slipped it into my pocket. Whatever was happening, I wanted evidence. The hallway was silent as I walked to the elevator. No neighbors chatting, no doors opening and closing. When the elevator arrived, Mrs. Whitaker was inside, clutching her small dog tightly against her chest. She looked at me with wide, frightened eyes. "Do you need anything from the store?" I asked. "I'm making a quick run." She shook her head rapidly. "Don't go near the river," she whispered, then hurried past me down the hall. The lobby was empty, even the doorman station abandoned. A notice board displayed the same bridge safety protocols poster I had seen in the basement, now with a new item added: "Do not touch or consume water from taps until further notice." Outside, the air felt wrong, heavy and damp despite the clear sky. A military Humvee rolled slowly down the street, a soldier standing in the turret, scanning rooftops with binoculars. I kept my head down and walked quickly toward the bodega. The store's shelves were half empty, bottled water long gone. The owner, Mr. Patel, shrugged apologetically when I asked. "Army took it all this morning. Said they needed it for distribution centers. Whatever that means." I bought some sports drinks and canned food instead, paying with cash when the card reader failed to connect. "You live near the river?" "Yes, Mr. Patel asked as he bagged my items. I nodded. He leaned close. "My cousin works sanitation. Says they found something yesterday in the water main near the Manhattan Bridge. Not contamination." He tapped his temple. "Something else. Something alive." A chill ran through me. "What do you mean?" "Alive?" He shook his head. "They made him sign papers." He wouldn't say more. "But he's not drinking the tap water. And neither am I." Outside again, I noticed more people had ventured out, most carrying empty containers, likely searching for water like me. Their faces shared the same tight, anxious expression. Nobody made eye contact. Nobody spoke. Despite the warning to stay away from the river, I found myself drawn toward the East River Esplanade. I needed to see for myself, taking side streets to avoid checkpoints. I worked my way eastward. 2 blocks from the river, I encountered a military barricade. Concrete barriers blocked vehicle access, while soldiers checked pedestrian IDs. A large sign declared, "Restricted Zone, Waterfront Access Prohibited." By order of emergency command, people were being turned away. I lingered nearby, watching, trying to look casual. One woman was arguing with a soldier, her voice carrying, "I've lived on Sutton Place for 20 years. My apartment is right there. Sorry, ma'am. No exceptions. Residential buildings within the exclusion zone are being evacuated." Evacuated? I wasn't notified of any evacuation. The soldier remained impassive. "Please proceed to the registration center at the Lexington Armory for reassignment." Reassignment? That sounded ominous. I turned down a side street, looking for another approach. Behind an old apartment building, I found a service alley that seemed to lead toward the river. No soldiers in sight. I slipped through. The alley curved between buildings, eventually opening to a small maintenance area behind a luxury condo tower that faced the river. A chain-link fence separated the area from the esplanade beyond, but a section had been bent back, creating a gap just large enough to squeeze through. I hesitated, weighing the risk, the emergency alerts, the soldiers, everything warned against approaching the water. But I needed to know. I slipped through the gap. The esplanade was deserted, unnaturally so for what should have been a busy morning. The usual joggers, dog walkers, and commuters were absent, replaced by an eerie silence. I moved to the railing and looked out across the East River toward Queens. The Queensboro Bridge stood silhouetted against the morning sky, still barricaded at both ends. No movement, no traffic, just a massive, empty structure spanning the unnaturally still water. The river itself looked wrong. Its usual grayish-brown had darkened to an inky blue-black, especially near the bridge pylons. The surface was too smooth, lacking the chop and current that typically stirred it. I raised my camera and zoomed in on the water near the nearest pylon. Through the viewfinder, I could see it, the same spiral pattern I'd observed the day before, water circling against the natural current, creating perfect concentric rings around the concrete base. As I watched, the water in one of these spirals began to rise, climbing the concrete impossibly, defying gravity. It formed a thin, dark tendril that wound its way up the massive support structure. I snapped several photos, hands trembling. Movement caught my eye not from the bridge, but from the water halfway between Manhattan and Queens. A section of the river's surface began to bulge upward, as if something large was rising from below. Before it broke the surface, a voice barked behind me. "This area is restricted." I spun around. Two soldiers approached rapidly, rifles at the ready. I quickly pocketed my camera. "ID," the first soldier demanded. His partner kept his rifle trained on me. I fumbled for my wallet, producing my driver's license. The soldier examined it, then spoke into his radio. "Sierra 5, civilian intercept at Sector 4 waterfront. ID scan required." A crackling response. "Copy Sierra 5. Hold position." The soldier fixed me with a cold stare. "What are you doing in a restricted area?" "Sir, I was just trying to get home." The lie sounded hollow even to me. "You're not from this sector." He held up my license. "Upper East Side is Sector 2. I was visiting a friend." I improvised. "Didn't realize this area was restricted." His eyes narrowed. "The entire waterfront has been restricted for 18 hours. There are notifications every 2 blocks. Before I could respond, a black SUV with government plates pulled up on the street behind them. 2 men in suits emerged, neither military nor police. "We'll take it from here," the taller one said, flashing some kind of badge. The soldiers nodded and stepped aside. "Mr. Thomas Allen?" the suit asked, approaching me. "I'm Agent Mercer. We'd like to ask you a few questions." "Am I under arrest?" "No, sir. We just need to understand your interest in the bridge and the river." "No particular interest," I said, heart racing. "Just curious about what's happening." Agent Mercer's expression remained neutral. "Did you take any photographs while you were here?" I hesitated. "No." His eyes held mine for a long moment. "I'm going to need to check your camera, sir." "I don't have to show you anything without a warrant," I said, immediately regretting my defiance. A faint smile touched his lips. "Under Emergency Directive 147, we have broad authority in restricted zones. Now, the camera, please." Reluctantly, I handed it over. He powered it on and began scrolling through the images. His face remained impassive, but something flickered in his eyes when he reached the photos I'd just taken. He showed the camera to his partner, who frowned deeply. "Mr. Allen," Mercer said, turning back to me. Did you observe any unusual phenomena while photographing the river? Like what? Movement, patterns, anomalies in the water behavior. I considered lying, but something told me they already knew the answer. Yes, the water was spiraling around the pylons, moving upward. Mercer nodded as if I'd confirmed something. And did you observe anything else? Anything emerging from the water? No, I said. This time, I wasn't lying. Whatever had been rising, I hadn't seen it clearly before the soldiers interrupted. Mercer studied me for a moment, then pulled out his phone. He showed me an official-looking document. This is a national security non-disclosure agreement. By verbal agreement, you are legally bound to refrain from discussing anything you've observed regarding the bridges or the East River. Violation carries serious penalties. Do you understand? Yes. I managed. Good. He pocketed his phone and handed me back my camera. Memory card removed. You'll be escorted back to Sector 2. I suggest you remain there and comply with all emergency directives. As they led me to their vehicle, I glanced back once more at the river. The surface was completely still now, showing no sign of the disturbance I'd witnessed. But as my eyes tracked along the water's edge, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. All along the Manhattan shoreline, the water line had risen, not by much, perhaps a foot, but enough to see that it wasn't natural tide. It was as if something beneath the surface was drawing closer to the land. Sleep had become a luxury I could no longer afford. 4 days since the first alert, and the city I'd called home for 12 years was becoming unrecognizable. I sat at my kitchen table, the blue glow of my laptop the only light in the apartment. Outside, the usual Manhattan ambience had been replaced by an eerie stillness punctuated by occasional helicopter rotors. My screen displayed a forum I discovered through a chain of increasingly obscure links. Bridge Watch, created 3 days ago, already with thousands of posts. Username, East River I. They're not fixing the bridges. They're containing them. Username, Manhattan Trapped. My cousin works DOT. Said they found something in the foundations last week. He's gone silent since yesterday. Username, Engineer X. The Brooklyn Bridge cables moved on their own. I have video. Uploading now. The video never appeared. The post was edited minutes later. Sorry for the confusion. Technical issues with my camera. Nothing to see. I scrolled further. Heart racing. These weren't conspiracy theorists or panic mongers. Their posts contained specific technical details, coordinates, timestamps. Many users identified themselves as city engineers, urban planners, geologists. My phone blared suddenly. The 6th emergency alert this week. Emergency alert. Misinformation spreading. Trust only official channels. I tossed the phone aside. The timing couldn't be coincidence. Someone was monitoring these forums. Private message notification popped up on my screen. Bridge Truth, you've been active but silent. Observer or believer? I hesitated before responding, just trying to understand what's happening. Bridge Truth, check your email in 2 minutes. Save offline immediately. Delete all traces. Precisely 2 minutes later, an email arrived containing only a PDF attachment with a misleading file name, NYPD_parking_regulations_2024. PDF. I downloaded it, disconnected from Wi-Fi, and opened the file. The document appeared to be scanned blueprints of the Brooklyn Bridge, dated 1869. But these weren't the plans I'd seen in history books. These showed impossible structures beneath the bridge towers, mechanisms that extended far below the riverbed, complex geometries that made no architectural sense. Handwritten notes in the margins read, "The anchors must remain dormant. The binding cannot be broken. A second page contained modern engineering assessments dated just last month. Anomalous movement detected in lower foundation structures. Concrete samples exhibit unprecedented molecular changes. Material no longer classifiable as concrete. Recommendation: immediate classification under National Security Directive. My hands trembled as I closed the file. This wasn't about structural failures. This was something entirely different. A knock at my door made me jump. I closed my laptop, heart pounding. "Who is it?" I called, pressing my eye to the peephole. "Daniel Kent, City Engineering. I need to speak with you." I didn't know any Daniel Kent, and I hadn't told anyone my address on the forum. I remained silent. "I know you're in there," he continued, voice lowered. "I'm not with them. I saw you yesterday, by the East River barricade. You were looking at the bridge pylons. You've noticed, haven't you?" Against my better judgment, I opened the door. Chain still fastened. The man was mid-50s, haggard, eyes bloodshot behind wire-rimmed glasses. "What do you want?" "5 minutes. That's all. What I have to tell you could save your life." I let him in, positioning myself near the door. He refused to sit. "I've been with the Department of Transportation for 27 years. He began, running a hand through thinning hair. "Specialized in bridge maintenance. 3 weeks ago, we found something during routine ultrasound scanning of the Brooklyn Bridge's underwater foundations." "What did you find?" "Movement. Inside solid stone. Patterns that shouldn't exist." He pulled out a folded paper from his jacket. "This is from our scanning equipment. The foundations aren't static anymore." The image showed what should have been solid concrete. Instead, there were channels, patterns like vasculature. The bridges weren't built on bedrock. He continued, voice dropping. They were built on something else, something that was already there. The original architects knew. It's all in their private journals, classified for historical preservation. Bullshit. They've been classified because they explain what the bridges really are. Which is what? Exactly. Anchors. Bindings. The bridges weren't built to connect land. They were built to keep something secured. My mouth went dry. That sounds insane. We tried removing a section of the Brooklyn Bridge's foundation last week. For testing, the material regenerated overnight. Concrete doesn't do that. He checked his watch nervously. They're not demolishing the bridges. They can't. Every attempt to remove significant portions has failed. The bridges repair themselves. I thought of the bizarre movements I'd seen in the water. And the military? They're containing, not repairing. They've known for decades what lies beneath New York. The bridges were designed to keep it dormant, bound. But something's changed. The bindings are failing. Another alert blared from both our phones simultaneously. Emergency alert. Weather warning. Unusual storm patterns over East River and Hudson. Remain indoors. Kent looked at his phone, then at me. There's no storm. Look outside. I moved to the window. The sky was clear except for strange, localized cloud formations directly over the rivers, spiraling unnaturally. They've stopped allowing anyone near the water's edge. He continued, not because of structural concerns, because the water itself is changing. Changing how? Properties, composition, behavior. It's not just water anymore. A low, distant humming sound became noticeable, vibrating through the floorboards. What's that? I asked. People living near the bridges report hearing it at night. Some say it sounds like machinery. Others say it sounds like... He trailed off. Like what? Like breathing. The humming intensified briefly, then faded. Kent moved toward the door. I've said too much. They're tracking anyone who speaks about this. I need to keep moving. Wait, I called. What happens when the bridges fully awaken? He looked at me, eyes hollow. New York was built here for a reason. The original Lenape warned Dutch settlers not to build here. They said the land was thin here, that things could cross over. The bridges don't just span water, they span realities. And they're opening. After he left, I returned to my laptop, searching for historical records of the city's bridges. Most sites were surprisingly offline or under maintenance, but I found an archived thesis from 1998, Mythological Symbology in New York Bridge Architecture. It described recurring motifs in the decorative elements of all major NYC bridges, symbols that predated the bridges themselves, appearing in cultures worldwide, always associated with binding, containing, or doorways between worlds. I grabbed my camera and zoomed in on the Brooklyn Bridge. Through the viewfinder, I saw something impossible, a cable moving independently, curling slightly like a tentacle before straightening again. I pulled my eye away from the camera, looked directly at the bridge. Everything appeared normal. I looked through the lens again. The cable moved once more, this time with purpose. The bridges were seeing us too. I set down the camera with trembling hands. The emergency alerts weren't warnings to keep us safe from failing infrastructure. They were desperate attempts to keep us away while they lost control of whatever lay beneath New York's waters, whatever had been bound there. Using the bridges as anchors for over a century, and now those anchors were coming loose. The seventh emergency alert woke me from fitful sleep at 5:17 a.m. I'd finally collapsed from exhaustion around 3, fully clothed on my couch, the curtains drawn tight against the city's increasingly alien skyline. Emergency alert. Evacuation procedures initiated. Report to designated gathering points. A map followed, showing several locations across Manhattan marked as evacuation centers. I noticed something immediately. Each center was positioned suspiciously close to a bridge approach. I showered quickly, the water pressure noticeably weaker than yesterday. As I dressed, I caught a glimpse of movement outside my window. People were already moving through the streets below, not panicked but oddly organized, walking in straight lines toward the evacuation points. Their movements seemed synchronized, almost mechanical. My phone buzzed with a text from my colleague, Sarah, at Evac Center by Manhattan Bridge. They're processing people quickly. Buses waiting. Come soon. I texted back, where are they taking you? 3 minutes later, safe zones outside the city. Hurry. Something felt wrong. The wording was too sterile, too official sounding. Sarah's texts were usually littered with emojis and exclamation points. I called her number. It rang once before connecting to silence. Sarah, I said. Pause. Then her voice, but flattened, effectless. You should come to the evacuation center. It's for your safety. Sarah, where exactly are they taking you? To safety. Away from the bridges. But where specifically? Another pause. Longer this time. I don't understand the question. Sarah, what color is your cat? I need to go now. They're calling my group number. Come to the center. She hung up. Sarah didn't have a cat. Something was very wrong. I packed a backpack with essentials, water bottles, protein bars, first aid kit, flashlight, the printed bridge blueprints from Kent. As I was about to leave, I realized I needed information more than anything else. I detoured to the Department of City Planning where my friend Marcus worked. If anyone would have access to evacuation plans, it would be him. The streets felt wrong. Not just empty, but somehow distorted. Distances seemed off, blocks taking longer to cross than they should. I passed an evacuation center at Union Square. Hundreds of people lined up in perfect rows, faces blank. moving forward in synchronized steps when directed by uniformed personnel who never seemed to look directly at the people they were processing. The Department of City Planning was eerily quiet when I arrived. Security waved me through without checking ID. Inside, most desks were empty, computers still on, coffee cups half full. I found Marcus's office door ajar. Marcus, no answer. I stepped inside. His desk was in disarray, papers scattered, chair overturned. His computer was still logged in. Screen showing a document titled Bridge Anchor Protocols, Classification Level 9. I clicked through it quickly. Most sections were redacted, but one paragraph stood out. In the event of full anchor failure, evacuation protocol thinning veil to be initiated. All civilians within Zone 1 proximity to be relocated to anchor reinforcement positions. Civilian awareness not required for effectiveness. A map showed Zone 1 areas, perfect circles around each bridge foundation. A sticky note on Marcus's desk held a hastily scrawled message. They're not taking people out. They're taking them TO. My phone buzzed again. Another emergency alert. Emergency alert. Communications disruption expected. Evacuation deadline 1800 hours today. I downloaded as many files as I could from Marcus's computer onto a USB drive, then headed out, moving away from the evacuation centers, deeper into the heart of Manhattan. By noon, cell service was completely gone. Internet failed an hour later. Digital billboards throughout the city displayed only the evacuation alert, the same message looping endlessly. I made my way to the New York Public Library, hoping to find historical records that might explain what was happening. The grand building stood silent, doors unlocked but no staff present. Inside, I found another evacuation center had been set up in the main reading room, but no one was being processed here anymore. Just rows of empty chairs and abandoned belongings. In the rare manuscript section, I found what I was looking for, a collection of early New York surveyor journals. One entry from 1624 by a Dutch settler caught my attention. The natives refused to build permanent structures on this island. They say the land is thin here, that it stretches over a great deep. They make offerings at certain points along the shore where they say the membrane between worlds is weakest. They warned us not to build anything that pierces too deeply into the ground. I photographed the pages with my now useless phone out of habit, then continued searching. Another document, this one from 1883. During the Brooklyn Bridge construction, unusual phenomena observed by caisson workers. Reports of movement below the riverbed. Sounds described as vast and breathing. Roebling insists on deeper foundations than engineering requirements specify. His design includes symbols from the ancient text he keeps locked in his desk. When questioned, he stated only that the bridges must bind what lies beneath. As dusk approached, I left the library and noticed something profoundly disturbing. The city's topography was changing. Buildings that had stood near the bridges were now adorned with strange symbols carved into their facades. Symbols identical to those in the bridge blueprints Kent had shown me. The water levels in both rivers had dropped dramatically, exposing portions of riverbed that should have been submerged. But the exposed areas didn't look like normal riverbed. They were covered in massive, geometric patterns that seemed to shift slightly when viewed from different angles. I made my way to a vantage point in Bryant Park, trying to map out a path away from the bridges. A group of about 20 people had gathered there, all looking anxiously at maps and discussing in hushed tones. The tunnels are blocked, an older woman was saying. All of them. They're not letting anyone leave the island. My brother went to the evacuation center this morning. A young man added. He called me after. Didn't sound like himself. Said they were taking them to the bridges. Not away from them. Has anyone seen the people who went to the centers? I asked. Heads shook. A teenage girl spoke up. My mom went. She texted me after. Just one word, foundation. As night fell, I noticed something else. People moving through the streets in perfect unison. Walking in groups of exactly 23. They moved with purpose toward the bridges. Their eyes vacant. Steps perfectly synchronized. I watched from behind a parked car as one group approached the entrance to the Brooklyn Bridge. They formed a precise circle at the base of the bridge tower. Then, in perfect unison, they knelt and placed their palms flat on the ground. They remained motionless for exactly 3 minutes before rising and walking directly into the bridge's foundation structure. Into openings that hadn't existed before and closed seamlessly behind them. I ran. No destination in mind, just away from what I'd seen. I found myself in an unfamiliar neighborhood, though I knew every inch of Manhattan. Streets curved where they should have been straight. Buildings leaned at impossible angles near the waterfront. I realized I was standing before a nondescript door with a symbol etched into it, the same symbol from the bridge blueprints. Without thinking, I pushed it open. Inside was a narrow staircase leading down. The humming sound I'd heard earlier was louder here, more distinct. It no longer sounded like machinery. It sounded like chanting. I descended into darkness, the vanishing of New York continuing silently above me. The staircase descended far deeper than any subway or basement should. The air grew colder, damper with each step, carrying a briny scent that reminded me of the East River but somehow older, more primal. The humming, chanting, grew louder, then abruptly stopped as I reached the bottom. I clicked on my flashlight. The beam revealed a massive underground chamber that shouldn't exist beneath Manhattan. The walls were a patchwork of different eras, sections of modern concrete abutting colonial-era brickwork, alongside rough-hewn stone that looked prehistoric. Water trickled down the walls, pooling on the floor in patterns that seemed deliberate rather than random. The beam of my flashlight caught something reflective, a modern keycard access panel embedded incongruously in the ancient stonework. Next to it, a steel door bearing the insignia of the Department of Transportation. Below that, someone had hastily spray-painted, "They are not bridges." I approached carefully, testing the handle. Locked. I pulled out the USB drive from Marcus's computer, remembering it had a metal edge, and jimmied the panel's casing until it popped free. 2 wires crossed, a spark, and the door clicked open. Inside was a government facility, sterile white hallways, fluorescent lighting, and complete silence. The walls were lined with maps of New York City from different periods, all with the same locations marked, the exact spots where bridges now stood. I moved deeper into the facility, passing empty offices with abandoned coffee cups and half-eaten meals. In one room, a bank of monitors showed live feeds of the bridges, not their roadways or pedestrian paths, but their foundations, underwater and underground. The footage revealed massive structures extending far deeper than any engineering requirement would demand, their designs intricate and nonsensical from a structural perspective. One monitor displayed a time-lapse of the Brooklyn Bridge's underwater foundation over the past week. The concrete was slowly reconfiguring itself, patterns forming and dissolving like a living organism's cells. Another room contained historical records, leather-bound journals, fragile scrolls protected in glass cases, clay tablets with unfamiliar markings. A placard read, "Binding architecture through history." Images showed structures from around the world, ancient bridges, aqueducts, certain temples, all with similar design elements to New York's bridges. A notebook lay open on a desk. Its last entry dated yesterday. "The binding is failing. The bridges are reverting to their true purpose. God help us when the crossing's complete." Suddenly, An eighth emergency alert blared from speakers throughout the facility. The voice distorted and inhuman. Emergency alert. Remain in your homes. The bridges are secure. The bridges have always been secure. The lights flickered. When they stabilized, I noticed something impossible. The straight lines of the hallway had developed a subtle curve. I continued through the facility, finding a central room with a circular table. Around it, 13 chairs, all empty except one. In it sat a figure so still I initially mistook it for a mannequin. As I approached, it turned a woman in a DOT uniform, her movements jerky, unnatural. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her voice monotonous. "The transformations are accelerating." "What transformations? What's happening to the city?" She tilted her head at an uncomfortable angle. "The bridges are returning to their original form. They were disguised, weaponized against their purpose. Now they're awakening." "What were they before they were bridges?" Her eyes seemed to focus on something far beyond the walls. Passages, doorways. The ancients knew how to bind them. We forgot. We built cities on top of thresholds. A violent tremor shook the facility. Dust rained from the ceiling. The woman didn't react. "You should go up," she said flatly. "See what's becoming. The city is transforming to accommodate what's coming through." I backed away as her skin began to ripple, the texture changing to something like the stone I'd seen in the bridge foundations. I ran. By the time I reached the surface, dawn was breaking, at least what passed for dawn now. The sky above Manhattan had taken on a greenish tinge, light filtering through it in ways that defied physics. I emerged onto a street that should have been Broadway but now curved sharply toward the East River. The city had changed overnight. Buildings nearest to the bridges had begun to physically transform, their architecture warping. Facades developing organic textures. Windows had reshaped into arched patterns reminiscent of the symbols in the blueprints. Some structures seemed to be slowly rotating, reorienting themselves toward the bridges. My watch had stopped at 3:17 a.m., but other timepieces I passed told conflicting stories. Digital displays counting backward, analog clocks with hands spinning in opposite directions. Near the bridges, time itself seemed unstable. The military presence that had dominated the city for days had vanished entirely. No soldiers, no barricades, no evacuation buses. In their place, small groups of blank-eyed civilians stood at precise intervals along streets, perfectly still, facing the nearest bridge. I approached one group cautiously. "What are you doing? What's happening?" No response. Their eyes were fixed on something I couldn't see, pupils dilated to perfect circles. One woman's arm was extended, pointing toward the Brooklyn Bridge. Her finger had elongated, the skin taking on the texture of bridge cable. I backed away, deciding to head toward Midtown, as far from any bridge as possible in this island city. But navigation had become impossible. Streets that should have run parallel now intersected at impossible angles. Avenues that once led north now curved inexorably toward the rivers. Every path eventually seemed to lead to a bridge approach. Central Park had transformed overnight into something alien. The trees had grown twisted, their branches forming complex geometric patterns against the sickly sky. The reservoir's water had turned thick and gelatinous, moving with purpose against the wind. At its center, a perfect whirlpool formed despite the water's viscosity, revealing something massive slowly rising from below. I wasn't alone in the park. A handful of others like me, still human, still themselves, had gathered near Bethesda Fountain, which now flowed with a luminescent liquid that wasn't water. "The bridges," a haggard man in a business suit was saying. "They're becoming what they always were. Passages." "Passages to where?" someone asked. "Not where," replied an elderly woman, her hands trembling as she clutched a book bound in what looked like bridge cable. "When? Before. Before humans. Before time as we understand it." Another tremor shook the ground, stronger than before. In the distance, the Empire State Building's straight lines had begun to curve slightly, its windows reshaping into familiar symbols. My phone suddenly chimed, "Impossible," with networks down. On the screen, a ninth alert, the text corrupted, barely legible. "The bridges are awakening. They are not bridges. They have never been bridges." The message was followed by a video file. I opened it to see footage of the Brooklyn Bridge from yesterday. As I watched, the bridge's suspension cables undulated like tentacles. The roadway rippled. The towers leaned inward, then outward, breathing, not a structure but an organism, awakening after centuries of enforced dormancy. The video feed switched to the underwater foundation. The concrete had fully transformed into organic material, pulsing with its own rhythm, and beneath it, exposed by the receding waters, massive eye-like structures were slowly opening. I dropped the phone as realization struck. The bridges weren't built over the water to span it. They were built to contain what lay beneath it. And now, the city was transforming to welcome its return. I woke disoriented, unsure if I'd slept minutes or days. The group from the park had taken shelter in the basement of a midtown office building, as far from any bridge as the island's new geography allowed. My back ached from sleeping on concrete, but physical discomfort seemed trivial compared to what awaited outside. "You were screaming in your sleep," said a woman who'd introduced herself as Diane, a former city planner. "We all do now." I rubbed my eyes, trying to focus. Something felt wrong about the room. The corners didn't meet at right angles anymore. The ceiling seemed higher than it had been when we'd entered. "The building's changing," Diane confirmed, following my gaze. "Slower here, in the center of the island, but still changing." We were down to 11 people now. 3 had left during the night, drawn irresistibly toward the bridges despite knowing what awaited them. No one had tried to stop them. Whatever was happening to the city, it affected minds as well as matter. "We need to move," said Gabriel, a physics professor who'd been documenting the impossible changes in the city's physical laws. "The safe zones are shrinking. This building won't remain stable much longer." I followed the group upstairs and into what had once been familiar Manhattan streets. What greeted us defied comprehension. The city I'd known was gone. In its place stood something that architectural principles couldn't explain. Buildings no longer respected verticality. They curved toward the bridges like plants seeking light. Windows had become organic apertures that dilated and contracted rhythmically. The streets themselves had transformed into undulating pathways that seemed to breathe with their own cadence. The sky above had taken on a greenish-purple hue, sunlight filtering through it in fractured beams that didn't cast shadows properly. Some objects had 2 shadows, others none at all. The air felt thick, gelatinous, as if the barrier between atmosphere and water was dissolving. "Look," Gabriel pointed upward. "The curvature." I followed his gaze and felt vertigo grip me. The horizon had developed a visible curve, not outward as on Earth's surface, but inward, as if Manhattan had become the interior of a sphere. In the distance, buildings that should have been obscured by others were clearly visible, space itself warping to accommodate new geometries. The 9th alert blared from emergency speakers that had sprouted from the sides of buildings like metallic fungi. "The bridges are awakening. They are not bridges. They have never been bridges." The voice was no longer electronically generated, but a chorus of synchronized human voices, thousands speaking as one, their words carrying harmonic undertones that made my teeth vibrate. "We need to get to Columbia University," Gabriel said. The physics department had been studying spatial anomalies near the bridges for years. They might have answers, or at least a proper shelter. We moved carefully through streets that no longer followed their maps. Most blocks now curved toward the nearest bridge, as if the entire city was being pulled into orbit around these focal points. The few people we encountered moved in strange patterns, their gaits unnatural, bodies elongated slightly as if stretched by unseen forces. In what had once been Times Square, we witnessed a gathering of hundreds standing in concentric circles, moving in perfect synchronization. As we watched from a hidden vantage point, their movements accelerated until they blurred. When they stopped, they had merged into a single organism, a tower of flesh and clothing that pulsed with the same rhythm as the bridges. "They're becoming anchors," whispered Diane. "Human anchors, reinforcing the bridges." We skirted the edges of the square, keeping to the shadows of buildings that offered less shadow with each passing hour. Light itself seemed to bend around certain structures, creating pockets of darkness in broad daylight and illuminating others that should have been in shadow. As we approached the Columbia campus, Gabriel's face fell. "This isn't right. We should be able to see the buildings from here." Where Columbia University should have stood, there was instead a vast spiral structure that twisted upward, its architecture reminiscent of both DNA helixes and the suspension patterns of the bridges. The entire campus had been reconstituted. "This can't be happening," Gabriel muttered, his scientific certainty crumbling. The mass required to reconstruct at this scale, the energy needed. "It's not reconstruction," said an elderly man in our group, speaking for the first time. "It's revelation. The city is becoming what it always was beneath the surface." We retreated eastward, looking for another shelter. The buildings became increasingly organic the closer we got to the East River. Facades rippled like water. Doorways opened and closed without human intervention. Windows gazed back at those who looked through them. In what had once been Gramercy Park, we found a small group of military personnel, the first we'd seen in days, huddled around communications equipment. Their uniforms had begun to fuse with their skin, brass buttons melding into flesh. Their commander, still mostly human, looked up as we approached. "You shouldn't be here," he said. His voice strangely doubled. "The anchors are rising. The convergence is accelerating." "What's happening to the city?" I demanded. "What were the bridges containing?" He smiled, his teeth now arranged in geometric patterns. "Not containing, connecting. The bridges weren't built to keep something out. They were built to create a controlled passage for something to come through." "Through from where?" Diane asked. "From before. From the other side of time." His eyes had begun to elongate, pupils stretching into vertical slits. Manhattan was never just an island. It was a membrane between realities. The native people knew. The Dutch knew. The bridge builders knew. They thought they could control the passage, use it. They were wrong. Another tremor shook the ground, stronger than before. In the distance, the Brooklyn Bridge's towers had completely transformed, now resembling massive organic structures that pulsed with internal light. "You need to decide," the commander said, his voice now barely human. "Join the anchors or be swept away when the tide returns." "What tide?" I asked. "The waters aren't just receding," he replied. "They're gathering. When they return, they'll bring what's been waiting on the other side." We fled as his remaining humanity visibly slipped away, his body contorting into a form that no longer resembled anything human. By nightfall, though the concept of night had become meaningless in a sky that never fully darkened, we had reached the northern edge of Central Park. The park had transformed into a vast geometric garden. Trees arranged in perfect fractal patterns that shifted when not directly observed. We found shelter in what had once been the Metropolitan Museum of Art. The building had remained relatively stable, its contents transformed but its structure intact. Inside, the art had come alive, paintings rippling with movement, sculptures rotating to track our progress through the galleries. In the Egyptian wing, the ancient artifacts had begun to glow with internal light. Hieroglyphs floated off their stone surfaces, rearranging into the now familiar symbols seen on the bridges. They knew, Diane whispered, staring at a papyrus where the symbols were rearranging themselves. Every culture built on thresholds knew. They all tried to control the crossings. I approached a glass case containing a small stone tablet. The description card identified it as dating from 3000 BCE. Discovered beneath the foundations of an ancient bridge across the Nile. As I watched, the etched symbols rearranged into English. The crossings are complete. The anchors have risen. The city belongs to what lies beneath. Exactly the words from the 10th emergency alert, the one that hadn't yet been broadcast. Outside, the sky above Manhattan rippled like the surface of water viewed from below. The city continued its transformation, buildings flowing like liquid, streets pulsing with light, and in the distance, the bridges, no longer bridges at all, stood fully revealed in their true form, massive, organic portals shimmering with energy, ready to welcome what waited on the other side. Manhattan wasn't just changing, it was remembering what it had always been. Dawn broke over a Manhattan that no longer belonged to the world I knew. We had spent the night in the transformed Metropolitan Museum, huddled together as the building subtly reshaped itself around us. 3 more of our group had wandered off during the night, drawn by voices only they could hear. We were down to 8 now. We need to understand what's happening, Gabriel insisted, his scientist's mind still desperately trying to categorize the uncategorizable. If we can understand it, maybe we can stop it. There's no stopping this, Diane replied, her voice hollow. This isn't an event, it's a revelation. I stared out through what had once been a window but was now a translucent membrane that pulsed with its own heartbeat. The city beyond had become nearly unrecognizable. Buildings had fully transformed into organic structures, their facades rippling like skin. Streets no longer followed linear paths but curved and twisted like blood vessels, all flowing toward the bridges. The sky above had ceased to be sky at all. It now resembled the underside of a vast ocean surface, light filtering through it in wavering patterns. Occasionally, massive shadows passed overhead, shapes too large and too strange to identify. My phone vibrated in my pocket. Impossible. With all networks down. The screen displayed a simple message: come to Rockefeller Center. Final broadcast. Truth. The message was signed, Marcus. I showed it to the others. It could be a trap, Diane warned. Everything is a trap now, I replied. But Marcus worked in city planning. If anyone knows what's happening. We set out through streets that defied navigation. Distances had become subjective. Buildings that appeared far away could be reached in a few steps, while others seemed to recede no matter how long we walked toward them. Gravity itself had become localized, stronger in some pockets, nearly absent in others. Near what had once been Fifth Avenue, we witnessed a group of former humans who had completed their transformation. They stood in a circle, their bodies elongated and twisted into complex geometries that mirrored the symbols from the bridge blueprints. Their skin had the same textured appearance as the bridge foundations. They didn't acknowledge us as we passed, their focus entirely on something invisible to our eyes. As we approached Rockefeller Center, a massive tremor shook the ground. The buildings around us swayed not like structures experiencing an earthquake, but like vegetation in a breeze. From somewhere distant came a sound like the groan of metal under immense stress, but organic, alive, the sound of the bridges completing their metamorphosis. Then, silence. In that silence, our phones simultaneously blared with the 10th emergency alert. The crossings are complete. The anchors have risen. The city belongs to what lies beneath. The voice was no longer even remotely human, a chorus of sounds that seemed to originate from the dawn of time, modulated into words that human ears could interpret. Rockefeller Center had transformed into a massive broadcasting hub, its architecture now resembling a vast nervous system with the central plaza serving as its brain. Former NBC studios had become organic transmission pods, pulsing with energy. In the center stood a figure that still resembled Marcus, though his body had begun the transformation we'd seen in others. "You came," he said, his voice overlapping with itself as if multiple versions of him were speaking simultaneously. "I wasn't sure the message would reach you." "Marcus? Is it still you?" He smiled, the expression stretching his face in impossible ways. "Parts of me. Enough to remember. Enough to want to share the truth before it's too late." "What truth?" Gabriel demanded. "What's happening to the city?" "Follow me," Marcus said, leading us into what had once been the NBC studios but was now a cathedral-like space filled with broadcasting equipment that had fused with organic material. Screens lined the walls, each showing a different bridge in its fully transformed state, massive. Living structures that pulsed with internal light. "I found the original plans," Marcus said, gesturing to a central console where ancient documents lay alongside modern computer terminals. "Not just for the bridges, but for Manhattan itself. The island wasn't discovered by Europeans. It was designed." He activated the central screen, showing a map of Manhattan from 1624, overlaid with complex geometric patterns that matched the symbols we'd seen throughout the transforming city. The native people warned the Dutch settlers. They said this land was a door, not a place to build. But the Dutch saw opportunity. They didn't just establish a colony here. They established a containment protocol. The screen shifted to show early construction of the Brooklyn Bridge. The bridges were the final phase, anchors designed to stabilize the membrane between worlds. But the designers made a critical error. "What error?" I asked, dreading the answer. "They built the anchors with materials from this reality. Eventually, those materials would recognize their true nature and remember what they were meant to be." Another screen activated, showing live footage of the East River. The water had completely receded, revealing the riverbed except it wasn't mud and rock. The exposed surface resembled skin stretched over massive bones, inscribed with the same symbols we'd seen throughout the city. "What we call the East River and Hudson River aren't rivers at all," Marcus continued, his body slowly elongating as he spoke. "They're the edges of the membrane, the thinnest points between realities. The bridges weren't built to cross water. They were built to stabilize the crossing points." "Crossing points to where?" Gabriel asked, his scientific skepticism finally shattered. "Not where," Marcus replied. "When? Before time as we understand it. Before reality crystallized into fixed laws. The primordial state of existence." The central screen changed again, showing a countdown timer, 43 minutes remaining. "What happens when it reaches zero?" I asked. "The tide returns," Marcus said simply. "The waters of the East River and Hudson aren't just receding. They're gathering. When they return, they'll carry with them what's been waiting on the other side since before humans existed." "Can it be stopped?" Diane asked. Marcus's face contorted in what might have been a smile. "That's why I called you here. Not to stop it, it's far too late for that. but to broadcast the truth. One final transmission before the crossing's complete. He gestured to a broadcasting setup that still looked operational. The emergency alert system is still functional. One last message can go out to the parts of the city that haven't fully transformed, to the outside world that doesn't yet understand what's awakening. What good will that do? I asked. Knowledge is the only defense, he replied, his voice now barely human. What's coming through doesn't just transform matter, it transforms understanding. Those who know what's happening might retain themselves a little longer. Gabriel approached the equipment. I can operate this. What should the message say? Marcus's body was rapidly changing now. Limbs elongating. Skin taking on the textured appearance of bridge material. The truth, that Manhattan was never just an island. That humanity has been living on the thin skin of something ancient and vast. That what we thought were rivers were the edges of reality itself. As Gabriel prepared the broadcast, I moved to the windows overlooking what had once been Midtown. The transformed cityscape pulsed with new life. Former humans moved in perfect geometric patterns through streets that flowed like liquid. Buildings had become organs in a vast, urban organism. And in the distance, where the rivers had been, something was moving, a vast darkness gathering, preparing to flood back into the space it had temporarily abandoned. The final broadcast began to transmit, our last warning to a world that would soon face what Manhattan was already becoming. On the screen, the timer continued its inexorable countdown. 32 minutes until the tide returned. My phone hasn't shown an emergency alert in 3 days. I don't know if the system is down or if whatever governmental remnant was issuing them has finally succumbed. In their place, there's only the humming, a constant, low vibration that rattles my molars and makes my eardrums feel like they're about to burst. I've made my decision. There's nowhere left to hide. Dawn breaks over what was once Manhattan, casting an oily sheen across the warped skyline. Buildings no longer maintain their rigid geometries. Instead, they curve toward the water's edge like plants seeking sunlight. The Empire State Building has bent at an impossible angle, its spire now pointing directly at the Brooklyn Bridge. From my vantage point in what used to be my apartment, though the walls now breathe with slow, deliberate movements, I can see that the island itself has changed shape, the shoreline pulsing in and out like a massive heartbeat. I pack nothing. Possessions have no meaning anymore. The photo frames in my apartment no longer show my family. The faces have morphed into strange, contorted expressions I don't recognize. When I look closely, their eyes blink. The elevator in my building has become something else. A vertical tunnel of membranous tissue that moistens as I approach. I take the stairs instead. 17 flights that somehow deposit me both at the lobby and somewhere else simultaneously. A man stands facing the wall, his back to me. I don't call out to him. The last person I spoke to, was it yesterday? 3 days ago? Had been standing that way too. When she turned around, her face had been a smooth blank plane of skin. Outside, the streets no longer follow the Manhattan grid. All roads now curve toward the bridges. No matter which direction you begin walking, the asphalt has softened in places, and I've seen footprints that sink 6 inches deep before filling with a clear, amber fluid. There are fewer people now. Those who remain move with deliberate, synchronized steps. Some walk on walls. Others stand perfectly still for hours, their bodies gradually blending into the architecture around them. I head east, toward the Brooklyn Bridge. Or what was the Brooklyn Bridge? What we always called a bridge, but never was. The humming grows louder as I approach. At the entrance to the bridge, where police barricades once stood, there's now an archway of bone-white material. It wasn't there yesterday. Carved into its surface are symbols that shift when I try to focus on them. Spirals becoming eyes, becoming nautilus shells, becoming galaxies. Something moves in my peripheral vision, and I turn to find a small group of people standing nearby. For a moment, I feel a surge of hope, other survivors. I see they move in perfect unison. Their eyes reflect nothing, their mouths open and close in rhythm with the humming. "You're going to see it, aren't you?" one of them says, though their lips don't match the words. "You're going to see what's beneath." I don't answer, but I don't have to. They know. They step aside as I approach the archway, forming an honor guard of sorts. The last human rituals for the last human act, curiosity in the face of the incomprehensible. As I pass through the archway, my perception shifts. The bridge ahead is no longer a suspension bridge of steel and concrete. It has become organic, pulsing with life. The cables are sinuous tendons, the towers vertebrae of something vast. The walkway beneath my feet is yielding, warm, the texture of living tissue. With each step, it responds to my weight, not just compressing but actively adjusting, almost cradling my feet. The East River below has drained completely. What remains is not a riverbed but a vast circular pit that descends farther than should be possible. The sides of the pit are lined with the same bone-white material as the archway, but here it's formed into intricate, interlocking patterns, a language written in architecture, telling a story I can almost understand. Halfway across the bridge, I stop and look toward what was once Brooklyn. The borough has changed even more dramatically than Manhattan. The buildings have merged into a single massive structure that resembles a cathedral or perhaps a hive, its spires reaching toward the bridge like supplicant hands. The sky above has taken on a greenish tint, and the clouds move in geometric patterns, perfect circles and spirals that never dissipate. There is no sun anymore, just a diffuse light that seems to emanate from the very air itself. I continue forward. The humming is no longer external, it resonates within my chest cavity, synchronizing with my heartbeat. I realize I've been humming along with it, my vocal cords vibrating of their own accord. At the center of the bridge, I find a circular platform that wasn't there before. As I step onto it, the platform begins to descend, carrying me down toward the pit where the East River once flowed. I don't resist. I come to see, and so I will see. The descent is long. Minutes stretch into what feels like hours. The walls of the pit reveal strata of history, buried ships, ancient foundations, and older things, fossilized remains of creatures that never existed in our biology textbooks. Machines from civilizations that predated humanity by millennia. And then I understand. Manhattan was never just an island. The bridges were never just bridges. They were anchors, yes, but not in the way we understood. They were appendages, reaching through from somewhere else, holding something in place or holding something back. The platform stops its descent at what must be hundreds of feet below the old river level. Before me sprawls a vast chamber, its dimensions defying Euclidean geometry. And in the center is the truth we never saw, though it was always there. It's impossible to describe what I'm seeing. My human brain struggles to process its dimensions, its nature. It's organic and mechanical at once, ancient beyond comprehension yet somehow nascent, still forming. The bridges, all of Manhattan's bridges, extend from its central mass like tentacles or roots or umbilical cords. I realize now that New York was never a city built on an island. It was a city built on an egg, an incubation chamber, and what has been growing inside is finally ready to emerge. As I watch, the entity, there is no other word for it, though it fails completely to capture its essence, pulsates with increasing rhythm. The humming reaches a crescendo that threatens to shatter my consciousness. The bridges, those things we thought were static structures, contract and expand like muscles, pumping something into the entity's core. Around me, the chamber begins to shift. The walls contract. The platform beneath my feet merges with the floor of the chamber. I find myself stepping forward, drawn toward the central mass. I should be terrified, but I'm not. There's a strange peace in finally understanding, in seeing the true shape of the world after a lifetime of blindness. My body has begun to change too. My skin ripples with new awareness. My bones feel fluid, responsive to the humming that now courses through me. I am becoming something else, something that can exist in the new reality being born. As I approach the central entity, I see others like me, humans in transition, their bodies partially merged with the structures around them. Their faces hold expressions not of horror but of profound revelation. The last of Manhattan collapses behind me, feeding itself into the chamber. The sky above, visible through a widening aperture, has become a swirling vortex of impossible colors. I reach out and touch the entity's surface. It's neither solid nor liquid, but something between states. Knowledge flows into me. The entity has been here for eons, buried beneath the weight of time and human ignorance. It is not malevolent. It simply is, and now it is awake. I understand at last. The bridges were never meant to cross the water. They were meant to let the water cross into us. And as my consciousness merges with the greater whole, as Manhattan rises from its foundation and begins its journey to somewhere else, I have one final human thought. We were never meant to survive this. We were only ever meant to witness it.